Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. We have another episode coming up, and we have a lot to talk about today. Touching base a little bit more on what has happened with the Blackhawks scandal. There's been a trade in the NHL, a few NFL newses that we have to break down, and also it's All-Star Week right now in Major League Baseball, so we're going to be recapping the first half of the season, some things we're looking forward to in the second half, and basically an update on all of our teams. I do apologize for the video quality today if you're watching on YouTube, at least on my end. My MacBook is hit the shitter, if you will, so it's being shipped up. So definitely a poor quality on that side. Hopefully we're back next week. Before all of that, Swig, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. I'm rejuvenated after taking last week off. Good to get a little refresher in and catch up on some other stuff. But I'm reared back, ready to go, address all of this news. I think it also worked out good with the timing that we wanted everyone to sit with that original Blackhawks news for a little bit. And that's what we're going to start with. Not as much today, but we got to emphasize how important that situation is. Can't allow it to be swept under the rug. But once we get past that, I'm excited to get into some more fun, upbeat sports talk after that.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with you on that. And we do apologize to everybody that is our loyal listeners out there that has been tuned in every single week since July 30th of 2020. Yes, I said July 30th. That is 15 days from the release of this episode. That's our 1-year anniversary. Stay tuned on Twitter at Big City Sports PD for that, because we're definitely going to be sharing something there. But let's get into this talk right now with the Blackhawks situation. And we talked about it last week, the sexual assault with video coordinator Brad Aldrich. Just a tough situation there. Brent Sopel actually reached out to the media, talked to some personnel in that front. But it's still a sticky situation. And what have you seen improve in these last few days?
I don't think I've really seen anything improve other than Sopel himself being the first member of that team to publicly speak out about the allegations. And I think he's more comfortable doing so because he is no longer playing and he isn't in some sort of coaching, management, scouting role. And he kind of said as much himself, saying, I think part of the reason that these guys, even the ones who aren't playing, haven't spoken out is because they have other jobs in the hockey industry and they don't want that to be tainted. And I get that if they didn't commit the behaviors, they don't want the sting of it to keep them from future opportunities. But I also think there's a moral obligation here not to just ignore it and hope it goes away. I don't want it to keep them from getting other jobs if they didn't take part in this. I don't want that. That wouldn't be fair to them either. But you also don't want stories like this to be swept under the rug and then allow potentially similar or even worse situations to happen down the line. So there's a lot at play here. So this will be a lot shorter than last week or 2 weeks ago when it was the primary focus of the episode. I'll give you a quick update, read directly from my notes here to make sure I say this right. Okay. So, like I said 2 weeks ago, it kind of seems like the Blackhawks strategy is hope this gets swept under the rug, let public opinion decide, and, try to do the ignorance is bliss approach. I don't respect that, and I think it's wrong. But here's the update that I wrote down here. So it looks like they're legal arguments. There's two main ones. So Brad Aldrich, as we know now, eventually went to Miami of Ohio, who they launched their own investigation, by the way, where it looks like there were 4 reports of allegations there as well, before going on to Michigan, where he, did assault, unfortunately, the 17-year-old player there, spent 9 months in prison. So that part's already just factual. Now, there were a couple of things here. It says the Blackhawks legal defense, they basically are saying they didn't have to report Aldrich's horrifying behavior to a government entity, saying something along the lines of these men were adults. Frankly, I think that's just chump shit. That's stupid. Even if it's technically legal, that doesn't mean that the optics and the morals don't make it unforgivable not to report. On top of that, they also argued that they didn't give him positive references before he ended up taking those other jobs. Even if they didn't give him the references, them not firing or condemning or reporting his behavior with the Blackhawks, in my opinion, absolutely enabled this behavior to continue at a college and then a high school. So even if he wasn't a Blackhawks employee at that point, they are still at the very least partially responsible for allowing that to happen, in my opinion. And I'll get yours here in a second. Outside of that, Yeah, Sopel spoke out, yeah, like we mentioned. The one other thing I wanted to ask were Joel Quenneville's comments. So head coach at the time, the Florida Panthers head coach right now. Basically, they asked him what his thoughts on the situation were. He said he didn't know about it and that he would participate in any independent review, which the Blackhawks said that they were going to launch an independent investigation. One other thing, Paul Vincent, the coach that they reported this assault to originally, and all the other players that are willing to participate have said they won't agree to the review unless they agree to make the findings of it public, which is really interesting and I think good. But Quenneville also said that he didn't know. But then when they followed up and said, why was your video coach, who you worked with for 2 years, fired with no explanation? And the Panthers didn't respond. So it seems to be that the open secret has some validity to it. There's a lot of layers to that. So I know I just rambled on for a few minutes, but that is the update that I was able to find so far. More news, I'm sure, will break here in the coming months as the legal process runs its course, but wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I don't like that the Blackhawks are keeping quiet of this. And the one thing that really irritates me, and I know the timing of this is kind of not necessarily perfect, but it's perfect in the sense that the Blackhawks wanted this to happen at the same time. And we're going to get into this later, but the Blackhawks did trade Duncan Keith. And I think they traded him right now and before anything started because they're trying to hide. This is a public relations tactic right here. Everybody in PR has to find a way to, okay, how do we get good PR? Because right now it's a PR nightmare in the Blackhawks front office right now and everything with the organization. So the best way they can get good PR out there is to, even if it's trading someone that's won a cup on this team, get them out and get the message surrounding your organization and the brand identity that you traded a superstar. That's the most recent news and the best news about the team right now, and not what has been reported or lack thereof these last few weeks of the sexual assault thing. So I don't like the timing of that, but I think it's exactly what the Blackhawks wanted, was to make a trade as this happened. But going back to your comments there about Joel Quenneville, I truly believe that he knew about this. I mean, everyone knows that it's an open book, and everyone had something towards that. So Brent Sopel, I applaud him for coming out and actually speaking on this topic, because not a lot of players are doing it. You mentioned some in the front office trying to keep their jobs. It's just a tough situation, and I do not like how the Blackhawks are handling it.
No, I honestly think it's appalling. And I know it's easier for me to say that as someone who's not a fan of the team. But I'll make it as clear as I possibly can here. People who know me know I want to see the Rangers win a Stanley Cup more than just about anything else on earth. I do not want them to cover up sexual assault or do something similarly horrible to get there. So there is absolutely a line that should not be crossed. And that line is a lot less significant than this, by the way, but I don't want to getting anywhere close to this level. There are things that are more important than the results of sporting events. I know I don't always think like that in the middle of games, but in my more rational moments, I'm well aware how important this is. So I do not like the Blackhawks' approach to it. I respect Sopel for coming out. I agree. We should absolutely applaud and encourage him and other players to provide as many details as possible. And who the victims, if they want to identify themselves, that is completely up to them. Their identities do not matter. The fact that the allegations happened, that is the thing, that the behavior happened. That's the thing that's really important. If they want to identify themselves, only if they want to. There shouldn't be any pressure on that. So I understand what you're saying in terms of they make the trade, kind of changes the recent news around the team where it's something more on the ice rather than off the ice. And the Blackhawks, we'll get into the trade briefly after this. They still have a hockey team to run. So there are going to be transactions that happen one way or the other. So at least part of it is not necessarily them ignoring the news, but the timing of this particular trade seems to be at least partially motivated by that, although there were Duncan Keith rumors before, in fairness. So we can get into the trade briefly, but we definitely wanted to reiterate from both of us that the stuff going on off the ice and the legal proceedings are far more important in both a hockey and legal and a human standpoint than the Duncan Keith trade. But we will address that here in a second. And I did want to get your thoughts on one last thing. Jonathan Tays, one of the members of that team who's still playing, said something along the lines of, so he didn't think it was an open secret. Yeah, he said something along the lines of, well, I think some guys knew whispers of it during the playoff run, and then he and everyone else who didn't found out about it in that offseason before the next season started. Even if that's true, I don't think that changes anything.
Right. I mean, either way, they still knew. It's just whether they knew at the time or eventually. Everybody knew, and they went into the next season knowing of everything that has taken place, and there really wasn't anyone that stepped up during that time, which I understand. Like, that's not a player's spot to step up and say, hey, I was touched or anything like that. That's not something you want. And as a Blackhawks fan, and this was the first time I felt this way ever, I was digging through my closet the other day looking for a shirt to put on to go outside to walk my dog. I saw my Alex DeBrincat shirt. I was like, I'm going to throw this on. But then I was like, you know what? I've never really thought about not wearing my team's shirt outside. But with everything going on with the organization, I said, I can't wear that today. I need to make sure that they are doing better, because right now I don't like anything that the Blackhawks are doing from that side of things.
No, absolutely. And nobody, with human emotion should, frankly. There's obviously a lot of complex layers to this. We don't know exactly what details are true and what details aren't on both sides, but I think we're intelligent enough and we have enough to get a general idea of that this happened. The Blackhawks not taking it seriously enough not only was appalling to the players who reported the allegations and dealt with the behavior, but then it enabled this Aldrich coach to go on to a college and then a high school and commit further heinous and despicable acts from there. So a lot of layers to it. That's the short version. Promised everybody that we wouldn't harp on this quite as long today, but we also don't want to underemphasize how important and fucked up this whole situation is. And we will continue to provide further details on it as we get them and as the whole legal process plays out. But quickly, not saying it's as important, Duncan Keith was traded to the Edmonton Oilers for Caleb Jones, a defenseman who's the younger brother of Seth Jones, who plays for the Blue Jackets, and a third-round pick. What were your thoughts on the trade?
Yeah, it's still setting in for me right now. I'm sentimental towards this trade. And lastly, wrapping up this first topic on this, if you wanted more in depth of what has taken place, go look at our last episode. We dove deep into that. So everything that transpired, what was said, what happened behind the scenes, this was just an update on what has happened in that situation. So go back to our last one. But the Duncan Keith trade, I'm upset. And I understand that he's an aging defenseman, and I understand that he wanted to be closer to his son, who he only got to see once or twice throughout the NHL season last year because of Canada's border restrictions. So that I feel for Duncan Keith. But what this tells me is I really wish, like, Duncan Keith's the heart and soul of this team. He's the guy on the back end in the playoffs that would log minutes, that took pucks to the face, that had his teeth go crazy. He was bleeding out. He didn't care. He was winning hockey games. He was helping you win Stanley Cups. So he's an ultimate competitor. He got that 13-year contract in 2009 that really set him up for success in this league and everything that transpired after that. He lived up 100% to that contract. But right now, looking at the trade as a whole, I really wish they would have found a way to move Brent Seabrook before they ended up moving Duncan Keith, because Keith, I thought, was a Blackhawk for life, but obviously his situation with his kid. But the return there, Caleb Jones, I think he's a heck of a defenseman for the Rockford Ice Hogs. Third-round pick, I think that's going to be just a middle-round pick, so not really much there. Good news about this is the salary is gone, so the salary's off the books for Duncan Keith.
That's the biggest win. That's the one thing I wanted to address. So sentimental things with Keith's pedigree and his long-standing nature on the team, with a guy who won multiple cups and multiple Norris trophies. I understand that. And for those who don't know, by the way, I kind of rattle these terms off, not knowing. Norris Trophy means won the award for best defenseman in the NHL. I feel like sometimes I just assume everyone knows that. I shouldn't do that.
He's got the Norris. He's got the heart.
Yeah, it's obvious to me. It might not be obvious to all of the listeners. So wanted to be a little bit more descriptive on that one. But Duncan Keith has been a Blackhawks player his entire career so far, going back more than a decade, has had a fantastic career. But the last season or two, like similar to any 37-year-old defenseman or player, especially one who's laid so much on the line like Duncan Keith, he has not been the same player. He was still getting first line minutes or first pairing minutes last season. And frankly, I don't think he's a first pair defenseman anymore. At best, I think he's a third pair defenseman. And the fact that the Oilers were willing to take on all of his big contract in the last 2 years of it is a miracle to me. To me, that's Ken Holland being like, well, he's got the pedigree and the experience and the former cups. He can help us win hockey games. And frankly, I don't agree with that line of thinking, but that's Edmonton's problem. From Chicago's side, I think getting rid of his contract entirely is a fantastic deal. Opens up a lot of options for them financially in terms of trades, signings, etc. going forward. The return itself, the third round pick, like you said, unless it turns into Braden Point, who was the third round pick, unlikely to have a major impact. But Caleb Jones, I think, is more interesting. I think as a player, he at best is a third pair defensive defenseman, a guy who's a little bit less physical than Zadorov, but also they did not need to give up the same terrible trade to get him. So Jones, if he's a third pair defenseman, fine. He doesn't cost much, and he won't be asked to do anything more. The real interesting possibility, I mentioned he's Seth Jones's brother, regarded as a star defenseman for the Blue Jackets. I'm sure you have some thoughts on this. Do you think that opens the door for them to go after Seth Jones in a trade?
That door is open. That door is slung open. And I'll be honest, I am scared. I'm locked in a closet right now, and I can't get out of it until I know what they gave up to get Seth Jones. Because I believe wholeheartedly Seth Jones is going to be a Chicago Blackhawk. I will die on that hill. I'll tell you, Seth Jones is going to the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, I don't know what the hell they're giving up, and it scares the heck out of me. Because I saw the proposal out there today that Kirby Dach starts with him. They want Mitchell, they want DeBrincat, they want a first, and they want Adam Boqvist. That is asinine. Asinine. I know Seth Jones is a great defenseman, but his play's dropped off the last few years, or at least last year immensely. His play dropped off. But I'm not giving that up because I talked to my friend earlier today who is a big hockey fan, and I said, I don't like this move. I said, I am not ready to give that up. He said, it shows that the Blackhawks are ready to win now. I said, I don't think that a move for Seth Jones makes them win now. When you trade a defenseman with leadership on your hockey team and you're giving up the young depth that you have to potentially build a dynasty. This is what the Hawks have been doing the last 5 years where they don't win anything. They're trading off Teravainens, they're trading off Chalmersons, they're trading off Panarins, and they're getting aging players back that have already played for him before. The only difference here, Seth Jones hasn't worn a Hawks sweater yet.
Not yet. I definitely see the thinking. I personally, I know that analytics don't tell the whole story, but Seth Jones hasn't been the same player the last couple of seasons. I think he is more name recognition than productivity at this point in his career, even though he is younger. That contract, and I know he's younger, and he could bounce back, but that is taking a massive risk. Now, getting him out of Columbus will probably do him some good, but at least on the ice. But I would be extremely wary of a trade. And even if it doesn't cost the Blackhawks quite that much, it'll still cost them a piece or two, even though, frankly, I don't think it should. If you look at the deep dive numbers, somebody's going to overpay. And just because they have his brother in the organization now doesn't mean that the price is going to go down on Columbus's end. It just might mean Seth Jones is more eager to go to Chicago. It might. We're just speculating. So I would personally say be very, very wary of that, as I'm sure you are already. But I personally don't think it would be a very good move, especially considering it'll be a much more significant return than Jones has shown to be worth the last couple of years. And he has some money owed to him as well. So we'll see what happens there. But it's a really interesting situation. And for any hockey fans out there, a lot's going to happen in the next couple of weeks, because by the end of July, there's an expansion draft for the Seattle Kraken, the regular NHL draft, and the start of free agency. And trades will be happening as well throughout all of that. So pay attention.
Yeah, it's going to be action-filled for the NHL as of late, or going forward in the month of July and into August. But I feel now, one of the names that was mentioned, I can't wait to get rid of, and that's Adam Boqvist. I do not believe in this guy at all. I'm willing to trade him for an apple right now, and I'd love it. I'd take a big bite of that apple, I'd eat it, and it'd be the best thing in the world. So Adam Boqvist, I'm telling you, go back to this episode. I'm going to clip this one day because this is bold and it's going to work. As I look like I'm being filmed on a baked potato with this old computer, I'm standing here right now with terrible video quality, telling you that Adam Boqvist is going to be traded to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and he will be a 20-goal scorer forward in the NHL.
Huh. So you mentioned that you look like a baked potato on the video. Are you sure you don't have aluminum foil wrapped around your head?
Yeah, that could be.
I don't know if I see that one, but definitely a very bold take. I look forward to using this video, and we'll definitely post it on social media if you happen to be wrong down the line. It's a good thing that you are not Adam Boqvist's dad, by the way, because that wouldn't be the "go get him, son" speech that he might be looking for.
Yeah.
I understand the frustration with him. He was a top 10 pick a few years ago. I think the Blackhawks' only recent high investment on the blue line, that high up in the draft. And he's been inconsistent at best. And I understand that he would be a legitimate piece that would probably go back to Columbus in a hypothetical trade. But my goodness, I don't know what I was expecting you to say about him, but that was not quite on my list.
Yeah, it's tough. Now, one thing I wish the Hawks will do, and I mentioned I don't like them trading for Seth Jones if the price is high. I don't like it in general. I think I don't know if Seth Jones is the guy to come over. I'd much rather give money to the guy that I hate watching in the playoffs because he always sucks in the playoffs. But it's Dougie Hamilton. I think that's who you're paying money to, is someone that's just a great guy. And I swear, Stan Bowman, if you give money, the money you finally got off the books for the first time in 5 years, you got money to spend. If you give Nikita Zadorov a penny, I'm going to, oh my gosh, I'm going to be pissed. You're going to see my face turn from a baked potato into a red tomato on this show, and it's not going to be pretty.
I think it'll be hilarious, though. Did I tell you weren't going to like Zadorov or what? Can we go find that clip of me being right?
I mean, he's just a bruiser, and that's it. He's not that good.
Worth Brandon Saad, though, right?
No, Saad had a great season on the Colorado Avalanche.
So did everyone not named Nazem Kadri in the first round, but that's a different story. We want to move on here to a couple of very brief NFL notes with Marcus May and Allen Robinson. Why don't you let everyone know about that?
Yeah, Allen Robinson, first player we'll talk about, Chicago Bears wide receiver, got the franchise tag this season, signed it, pen to paper. Wow. Andy Dalton was named starter, so kudos to him for taking that money up front, not holding out even when the Red Rifle's throwing the ball. But it looks like he was offered 5 years, $50 million. He said no deal, just like he's on stage with Howie Mandel, and he said no deal. So looks like he's going to not potentially sign that extension that is due by 4 p.m. For a long-term extension. So Allen Robinson, he's a shark. Look out, Bears fans. I watched him in Jacksonville play this card, and I understand he was coming off an ACL then, but he likes money, and he likes a lot of it. You don't have a lot of it to give. So Allen Robinson's probably on his way out of town after this contract expires on the franchise tag.
Exactly. And for anyone who doesn't know, any NFL team can give a player that franchise tag. That gives them until July 15th, which is today, as this is being uploaded, actually, at 4 p.m. to sign a long-term extension with the team. Or if they sign that one-year franchise tag, they can play out that season and then hit free agency again. Now, the team could theoretically give a player a tag a second time, but it would cost them more money that time to do it. So it's very, very rare. I think Kirk Cousins was the last one that happened to. I could be wrong on that, but he is at least an example of somebody who did get the tag twice when he played for Washington. And we've said in the past, Allen Robinson has made it pretty clear he doesn't want to stay long-term in Chicago. And Andy Dalton, I don't think, is going to change his mind on that. And me, biased Giants fan, has the Bears first-round pick next year. I hope the Bears go 0-17, and we'll see if that happens. But there is at least a possibility that they have a rough season and Robinson's going to sign elsewhere. And then the other one we wanted to talk about is Marcus May for the Jets, safety. And by the way, that franchise tag is worth a different amount depending on the position that you play. But the rule in terms of costing more the second year remains the same. Marcus May was rumored to be or shown to be the Jets' priority in terms of an in-house player to keep around and get locked up. They gave him the tag, but it doesn't sound like they're going to come to an extension by 4 p.m. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, definitely a situation there for Marcus May. He's a staple on that defense and someone you want to bring in. So definitely a spot for him. I think hopefully he can stick and the Jets can get it done long term. They have money to spend, unlike Chicago. So hopefully they can find a way to get that done. If not, they might have to work on an extension next offseason.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens. I do think the Jets are more likely to find a way to keep May or even come to an agreement before this 4 p.m. Deadline tomorrow. Or, well, tomorrow is we're recording this. Today, as it's being uploaded, things could change. I think it's more likely that something happens there than it does with the Allen Robinson situation. But I've been wrong before, and we'll see what happens. We'll definitely keep everyone updated. I think now is it baseball time?
It is baseball time, and the team we are starting with first, we might be starting with fireworks, but I'm letting the cat out the bag. It's the 14th of July that we're recording this, not the 4th of July. We'll see if fireworks are started, but we're starting with the New York Yankees. So far this season, they have been, I guess you could say, down and up and then down again. That's basically how their season's been. The bullpen was solid in the first half, has really fallen apart here with injuries and inconsistency as of late. Pitching staff, the starting rotation was solid at the beginning. Then they started to have some trouble with injuries to Corey Kluber and among others. Jameson Taillon's been a disaster. But the offense has definitely taken a big step this year down, big step down. Not a lot of production from players, including DJ LeMahieu, who had an MVP caliber season a few years ago, really played well last year, has fallen apart just a tad this year. What have you seen from this Yankees club?
You rattled off a partial list of a very long laundry list of problems that the Yankees have had this season that have been building up, I think, for a couple seasons, and they are all finally starting to snowball in this absolute Pompeii-level disaster of a season that we're embarking on right now. I haven't heard a list of problems that long since I read all the details about Britney Spears, and free Britney, by the way. It has been a terrible season that ended with an absolute fucking nightmare of a loss in the last game before the break. But even if the Yankees won that game, they are, I think, tied for third place, 8 games back, covering a couple games over 500. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know where to start, man. There are so many problems. We'll address these one at a time. We'll do starting rotation. We'll do bullpen. We'll do the lineup. But it's been very inconsistent, to put it mildly. There have been questionable managerial decisions with Aaron Boone, who I've never said to be a fan of. But he's also not the only person to blame here, because he's clearly a puppet for what the Yankees front office wants to do. And while he is far from perfect, there's a whole, I think, flawed organizational structure starting to show here. I could go on about this for a very long time. The Yankees did win 4 out of 6 the last week before the break. There's something positive. And Garrett Cole had a very nice bounce back performance. But I want you to ask me these questions one at a time. Ask me about the starting rotation. Ask me about the bullpen. Ask me about the lineup.
Let's go in that order. Let's start with the starting rotation. This year, we saw Corey Kluber get off to a solid start with his new club, and then he got the injury that set him back. He's on the 60-day IL. You saw Herman start off the season. He ended up going down to AAA, came back up, so we've seen a little bit of things with him. Jordan Montgomery, I thought, has been consistent. I mean, he gives up his 3 runs a start, but then again, he does have that occasional bad start where he gets roughed around. But the starting rotation, now we talked on here for an episode. It was early in the season. It was like May or something. We said this is a big part of their success at that point. We said that's why they're winning games, is because of their starting rotation, because of their back end of their bullpen, and their lineup could be okay to take a few nights off because that's so dominant. I said I don't think it can continue. What have you seen from the rotation?
A lot of terrible pitching, especially recently. The starting rotation was doing surprisingly well to begin the season. But there have been a lot of issues more recently that have popped up as the lineup has started to awaken slightly, I guess. So focusing on the starting 5. Okay, Garrett Cole, we'll start with him, the most important pitcher in the Yankee rotation. Was off to a very good start for the most part. Then Major League Baseball has introduced the sticky substance crackdown, and everyone knows that Garrett Cole used something. I don't know what the fuck it is, but he used something, and his spin rates are still way down, and he had 3 or 4 terrible starts in a row. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that at least had an effect. I have enough faith in Cole to say that he will at least get readjusted to not using whatever the hell spider tack, whatever that he was using before. And we started to see signs of that because he threw a fantastic complete game shutout in his last start before the break that I couldn't even enjoy for more than 12 fucking hours, but whatever. That's a separate issue. I'd like to see him consistently pitch well again because we're paying him a lot of money and he's in the second year of a 9-year deal. So I hope that he starts to readjust because he was bad for about 3 weeks straight before that start. Moving on here, I think Montgomery pretty much hit the nail on the head. He's a solid, consistent starter, the only one in the rotation. I think he's more of a back-end rotation piece. Who the hell is the Yankees' second starter right now with Corey Kluber out and Luis Severino still injured again, working his way back from Tommy John and now a groin injury? Because the other guys in the rotation, okay, Jameson Taillon he had 2 nice starts in a row to end before the break, okay? It wasn't his fault they blew the Astros game. He had 6 innings, 2 runs. I can't blame him for that. Hopefully, he can build off that in the second half. But he was terrible for 15 starts before that, so I'll believe it when I see it. Montgomery, I think, is fine as a back end of the rotation guy. But once Kluber got injured, that led to Michael King getting some starts. And yeah, that has predictably flopped. He is better as a long man out of the bullpen, to put it kindly. And then I'll ask my most baffling question, I think. Have you the Domingo Germán situation the last couple of weeks? He had a couple of bad starts to start the season. He was good for a while. He has sucked for a month straight. And then it culminated with one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in a game against the Mariners last week, where he was going to start and then a few hours before said he wasn't going to because he had an emergency root canal and that he wouldn't be available. So the Yankees start this reliever who shuttled back and forth between AAA and the majors named Nick Nelson, who sucks. You don't have to fact check me on that one. Just look at his ERA. He sucks. He lasts 2/3 of an inning. Luis Sessa pitches a few innings. The Yankees offense was awake that night, so they have a lead. And then Domingo Germán pitches in the 5th in relief. I have so many questions about that, just how he's been handled. He's been very inconsistent, and then he made 2 appearances as a reliever in the last week of the first half. So the short version of the rotation was good for a while. It's been very inconsistent, mostly bad since. And what the hell was going on with Germán making 2 relief appearances before the break when he was supposed to have a root canal earlier in the day? That's just weird. That's weird, right?
Yeah, it's really weird, and it seems like it was sort of like an opener strategy, if you will. But it seemed like he comes in the 5th. Like, how many relievers are you going to before you're getting to your guy that's supposed to give you innings? Like, you're pulling him out there in the 5th. I mean, it's a tricky. He might have had a root canal. I mean, you can't really tell. I would assume that he did if they reported that he did. So I think it's weird to bring him out in the 5th inning. Like, I don't know if he still did his usual routine that he's going to start with the stretching and everything, or if Boone just phones the bullpen. It's like, hey, get Germán up. Just get him ready to go. Maybe he can give us some innings. Like that's kind of stupid situation going on there. But to your point, Michael King does not have a win this season in any of the starts he's made. He's pitched in 14 games. No wins, 3.72 ERA. So definitely a pitcher that is best suited in a long role, like you mentioned, sort of the Alec Mills of this team. We'll get into the Cubs later. But what have you seen from the bullpen? Now, we'll get into that. I know they have been a disaster as of late. Aroldis Chapman has been an absolute – I don't have a word to describe how he's been the last few games. But what have you seen from this bullpen?
A lot of blown leads, injuries, and inconsistency is the nice way to put it. Quick shout out to Nestor Cortez, by the way, for any Yankee fans who wanted me to mention him. He's got a mustache and he's pitched pretty well. It's pretty cool. Bullpen. Holy shit, where do I begin? Injuries really quick. Darren O'Day, who the Yankees signed in the offseason, the side-arming right-handed pitcher, pitched for a little bit, got injured, very briefly came back, pitched 1 or 2 more games, and got injured again. The Yankees are missing Zach Britton as well. Chad Green has been good for the most part until Sunday. And then Jonathan Loaizaga had a pretty good season, and he was on the COVID list so for the last 2 games of the first half, so he was unavailable for those. Let's just get to the real reason we're going to talk about the bullpen, and that's Aroldis Chapman, right? What the hell happened to him? So he was admittedly fantastic the first 6 weeks, 8 weeks of the season or so, giving up 1 run in his first 18 appearances. I can't complain with that. I really can't, as much as I usually find a way to try. Since then, he's absolutely justified my pessimism and lack of faith in him by blowing every lead known to man. That man could not save leftover chili in the fridge. He has been pissing me off more than anyone else on the team, and there have been a lot of contenders to that. He had an ERA of .24, I think, at the end of May, and now it's almost 5, and he somehow made the fucking All-Star team. That is not deserved. He blew a 4-run lead against the Angels right before, as we were recording a couple weeks ago. He blew the game against the Mets that Boone, for some reason, put him in for. He has blown so many games recently. He's given up runs in almost every appearance, except for the 12-1 Seattle game where he still gave up 3 walks and 2 hits or whatever the situation was. The guy just, holy shit. He has had inconsistencies, ups and downs in his career before. He throws very hard and has added breaking balls to his repertoire now. And I understand that will lead to some peaks and valleys, but this has been by far the biggest and longest low point of his career. He has cost us several games at this point. He is doing the exact opposite of what a closer should do. It really started in the game against the Twins about a month ago, where he gave up 4 runs on 9 pitches and didn't get an out. And he has had multiple appearances where he hasn't gotten an out since then. He had one against the Angels. He had one against the Mets. And he finally stopped pitching after that, where Aaron Boone refused to go to him, even in a 5-run lead situation, or even when Garrett Cole had thrown 112 pitches. It has been a complete disaster. So if the Yankees are going to have any chance to surprise me, he needs to get his shit together now, because he is absolutely been a catastrophe for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, he has been ugly to watch. Ugly to watch. I mean, it seems like no lead is safe. You could be up 10. And, I mean, that's a situation you give them work. But when are the Yankees ever up 10 in a big game like that? So it's tough to try to get a closer right. Believe me, I know watching Craig Kimbrell over the last 2 years. Now, he's been dynamite as of late. But I do think, I know this is sort of deadline talk getting into a few weeks from now, but I do think they need to bolster that bullpen. If they want to be, I mean, we don't even know if they're going to be buyers or sellers. That's the thing with the Yankees club right now. So that's something, definitely a topic later on to talk about. I don't know what direction they go. I personally sell. I don't think that this team's built to win right now, but it's just so tricky because the bullpen has just been a disaster. You need Britton healthy. You need what's his face healthy. Loizaga, obviously off the injured list. Darren O'Day needs to be healthy. 2 people that really need to step up and be there for this club, because outside of them, it really hasn't been anything. You've gotten ups and downs from Wandy Peralta. Nestor Cortez, you mentioned, was good. But this bullpen has kind of been a disaster.
Yeah, especially recently. I mean, there have been some good stories like Lucas Litke, who's pitching this year for the first time in 6 years and has been okay. He's been decent for the most part, but my goodness, Wandy Peralta is not what I had in mind to upgrade the bullpen, by the way. I think we can do better than that. I hope we can do better than that, but I'll believe it when I see it at this point. It's been a disaster. So hopefully Chapman gets his head out of his ass, and hopefully the Yankees get healthier going forward. If they're going to have any chance of making up some ground and sneaking into a wild card spot or something, 8 of their first 10 games out of the break are against the Red Sox. So I think they need to win at least 5 of those 8 games. They're not going to, considering we're 0-6 against them so far, and the Red Sox are frankly better and smarter than us in every way. I agree that we should sell because I think our core has reached its peak in 2017 and 2019, although the Astros did kind of have something to do with that. But I think it's been clear that this group of players, the core mostly the same, is not going to win a championship at this point. So, yeah, I would sell, but I don't think the Yankees are going to. Let's talk about the lineup before I have a brain aneurysm.
Yeah, briefly on the Red Sox, they're calling up their top prospect, Jarren Duran, making his MLB debut tomorrow night on ESPN. So something
Wonderful.
to watch out for there. But anyway, the Yankees offense, the main storyline here is their lack of speed. They went out and traded for Tim Locastro to help them out. He actually popped a home run the other day, has had the speed that is played, but I just like to see more out of him. And outside of that, I mean, they just continue to roll into double plays. It seems like every single time they don't have the speed to beat them out. They don't try to move runners. They don't put any in motion. It's a lot of right-handed bats and a lot of pop-ups, a lot of do or die approach at the plate. And when you're trying to do that, you might walk a lot, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help if you ground out into a double play every time they get on base.
Yeah, pretty much. A lot of double plays, a lot of base running errors, the same shit we talked about last time. The Yankees offense has been a little bit better of late since a horrible start, but they're going to be the top 3, top 5 offense they were a couple years ago. I don't think there's a chance in hell that happens. They've been linked to Joey Gallo, who is at least a left-handed bat. Maybe. Why the hell not? But we could go through the lineup individually. But yeah, DJ LeMahieu hasn't been the same elite player. He's been better of late. But the Yankees as a team don't really get any hits with runners in scoring position. So that's going to be I think the biggest overall problem compared to everything else. They've had some injuries now. They don't really have a lot of balance in the lineup. Like you said, LeCastro is another right-handed bat. He can run. That's true. He doesn't solve any of our problems outside of being better than Andujar defensively. Aaron Judge, you look at some of these guys and they're having decent seasons statistically. Judge is doing fine. Gary Sanchez has rebounded after a slow start. It's been good to see that. Stanton even has been mostly healthy and has decent numbers. But, I mean, the double plays have been a problem throughout the lineup. The one guy I want to single out who's baffled me more than anyone else, I'm sure you know who it is. What the hell happened to Gleyber Torres? This guy is 6 months older than me, had 2 elite seasons. Now, he wasn't great last year in 2020, but 60-game weird pandemic season. Give it a pass, right? The Yankees as a team weren't very good, but shorter season. This year has been pretty much normal. The guy's hitting 235. He doesn't have any power anymore. He's not driving in any runs. What the fuck is going on, man? He's way too young to turn to shit already. And he is, frankly, I don't think been a major league quality bat so far this season. So, and he's also a liability in the field at shortstop. So I'm getting a little frustrated with him. He has enough talent. He is young. He can absolutely start to turn it around. But I'm losing faith that it's going to happen this season. And the Yankees obviously invested a lot to get Gleyber Torres. And for the first 2 seasons, looked like he was worth the investment. But lineup for the most part has been bad, frustrating, and stupid. I think he is the guy that's been frustrating me more than anybody else because he's way too young and talented to be this terrible.
I know what happened to Gleyber Torres. He was a Chicago Cubs prospect. Look at all the Cubs hitters. They all fall off. Addison Russell the same exact way. Addison Russell and Gleyber Torres, granted Russell played defense and he also had the off-the-field issues. Gleyber Torres, it's the same guy. Addison Russell's power disappeared. His average disappeared. They're both 24 years old. Russell maybe 25, 26 now. That's what they are. All the Cubs hitters, Ian Happ's down. Everyone through that organization, had potential. They popped off right when they got there, and then they all fall down. Bryant has now revived a little bit, but he did hit 104 in the month of June. So tough riding for him. Javi Baez, we all know his approach. His average has dropped and dropped and dropped. You're seeing it from everybody. So I think that's part of what's happening. Now, I know he's on a different team, and I know he's had success there, but I personally believe that it's the way the Cubs have developed their players that it's fallen onto his shoulders too, because it follows that same track.
I understand the point you're trying to make. I definitely I want to get into the Cubs developing here when we get to their segment. Torres, though, got out of the Cubs system and then was pretty good for the Yankees for a couple years. I don't know how much you can blame his regression the last 2 seasons when he's been out of the Cubs organization since 2016 on them, but I do see the point you're making. Now, before I, have a blood vessel pop out here, I hope everyone enjoyed it, but yeah, the Yankees have been a short version, average, inconsistent team all season. Their odds of the playoffs aren't great, and I'm not thrilled about it. So let's move on to the Mets, shall we?
Yeah, final thing, at the end of every team, I'm going to give you 2 questions. One, if you're a teacher right now and you're asking to grade the manager, are you giving him A, B, C, D, or F? I'm going to start with Aaron Boone. That's the first question. What are you giving the Yankees manager grade so far this season? How has he done?
What do you think I'm going to say?
I think you're going F.
I think you're right. And not the one I'm sure I said about 12 times in that rant. But yes, I don't think it's all his fault. In fairness, I definitely think that the Yankee organization as a whole is absolutely responsible for the flawed construction of this team. I'm not a Boone fan. I haven't been for a long time. The last straw for me was in the playoffs last year. F for me. F.
Yeah, Mike, when he's starting Michael King, when he's bringing freaking Herman out of the bullpen, when he's bringing Chapman in day after day when he sucks, that's a managerial decision. That's an F on the part of the Yankees. Final question on the Yankees: what is their record, or where do they finish at the end of the season?
They finish in fourth place at exactly 500. Next.
I got them 5 games over 500, but I got them third in the division. So let's head over to the New York Mets. The New York Mets are riding high right now in the NL East, sitting atop the division thanks to a masterful season so far by Jacob deGrom, their horse. The pitching has been great. Taijuan Walker has been a phenomenal signing in the offseason. I was not high on him when they signed him, but he has put a sock in my mouth and said, "Shut up, dude." And he has come out there, pitched. He's made the All-Star game. Good for him. The Mets pitching has been solid. But the offense, it seemed like they were banged up, and then they couldn't get any production out of them. The pitching carried. Now the pitching's banged up a little bit. Marcus Stroman battled some injuries. He's back, but it just seems like they're not on sync yet. So I think the Mets right now, although they're atop the division, I still think there's another gear they can get to make them dangerous.
They absolutely can. I agree. Their offense is, we've talked in the past about how many injuries the Mets have had, especially in their lineup, and they are mostly getting healthier now. Nemo's back, etc. They have pretty much everyone not named J.D. Davis at this point, so that's definitely going to help them. The pitching has been very, very good. I want to get into their approach at the deadline here shortly, but while the Mets have not really been totally in sync, I don't think, this whole season, they have still been in first place because they have the good fortune of playing in the league's shittiest division, and that Philadelphia and Atlanta and Washington are all hovering right at or just below 500. The Mets, I think, have been the only team above 500 in that division for most of the season. That's going to help them out, and if they're playing above 500 ball while they're not at 100%, that's going to bode well for them in the second half of the season and towards the playoffs, as much as I hate to admit it. Their starting rotation is definitely the strength of the team again, I would say. Their bullpen and offense have definitely let them down in recent years, but I think there's signs of improvement there as well. I want to start really quick with that rotation. So I've read that at the trade deadline, which for anyone listening is coming up around July 31st, I believe, so about 2.5 weeks, that their priority is to add another starting pitcher. So right now, they have deGrom, Marcus Stroman, and Taijuan Walker, who have all been outstanding when healthy this season. And outside of that, David Peterson's been a little bit inconsistent, but he's got talent. Joey Lucchese's out for the season. They are going to get Carlos Carrasco back eventually, is the thought, possibly Noah Syndergaard as well. But can you rely on them to be the productive pitchers they were in the past? So I read an article, and the article spit out 3 names. I was curious on all 3. If you think the Mets should go after any of them, because we all know they are going to be aggressive now if they think they should. Jose Barrios, Kyle Gibson, John Gray, who pitched for Minnesota, Texas, and Colorado, respectively. All 3 of those teams sucked this year, so they could be selling off. Do you think the Mets go for any of those pitchers, or should they?
I don't think they should. I don't think they should go after any of the pitchers. But, man, you just put a thought in my head. Jose Barrios would look fantastic with the New York Mets. I mean, you drop him in that jersey. I mean, he's going to be carving you up. He's going to do everything for you. But I think right now, when you get to the playoffs, you don't really need 4 or 5 starters. You need your main horses. As long as deGrom's healthy, as long as Taijuan Walker's healthy, that 1-2 punch could knock you out of the playoffs by itself. So I don't think that should be a concern right now. I do think they need another bat in their lineup, whether it's right-handed or left-handed. You got Conforto struggling a little bit right now. Jeff McNeil, the lefties there, Dom Smith, and then you also got right-handed power of the Derby winner, Pete Alonso. You have enough right there, but I think that they are going to be aggressive, 100%. I don't think it's the pitchers because you're getting Carlos Carrasco back. He's going to bring enough. He has the postseason experience, and he's just a leader in that clubhouse. I think he's fine, and I think you can get by with guys like Jared Eichhoff, a couple pitchers like that have been in the league for a while. I don't really think they should go out and get a big-name starter. I'm fine with adding like a 4th or a 5th starter off a team that hasn't been playing so well. Maybe you reach out to a team like the Baltimore Orioles, try to snag someone. I know their pitching isn't the best, but you could try to snag a 2 off of them or just something like that can help boost that rotation just a little bit, but not to where you're giving up your farm for another arm.
I think the Mets are not thinking in small pieces anymore with their new owner and their financial flexibility. And while I do agree that you don't need five starters in the playoffs, now if Carrasco and or Syndergaard are able to come back, they can be used out of the bullpen in the
Right.
playoffs, which would be really, really dangerous. And that would provide them with that pitching depth they need. But you also, all the pitchers that have been, DeGrom's missed some starts, Stroman's missed some starts. There have been some injury problems. Carrasco and Syndergaard are hurt right now. So, and Lucchese's already out for the season. I don't know how much you're going to trust David Peterson in a playoff spot, especially a close game. And the bullpen, while it's been better, has still been shaky. Now, Aaron Loop, the former Toronto Blue Jays, actually had a really, really good season out of nowhere. Diaz has been okay. Edwin Diaz, the closer. Honestly, the Mets, while they're still in pretty good shape overall, they also had their worst loss of the season in their last game before the break. Blew a 5-run first inning lead to the Pirates. So, that's pretty rough. But overall, I think they're still in solid shape. I don't think it's out of the question they go for another arm that's in the bullpen. That's an upgrade over Juris Familia or Seth Lugo or something like that. I think they should prioritize another bat in the lineup, but they also have a surprising amount of big league players on this roster, and some of them are going to end up being designated for assignment or sent down as they start to get healthier. So I think they are honestly going to prioritize pitching more, whether it's a starting pitcher or a bullpen arm. That's what we're going to see. But even though on paper their lineup is a bigger need, I think they're going to go for pitching.
A thought just occurred in my head. You can get all three from the same team. You can go call up Jed Hoyer and the Chicago Cubs, get Zach Davies, get Ryan Tepera, and get Chris Bryant. Send J.D. Davis back, send Peterson back, and send 3 prospects back.
Interesting trade idea. I think the Mets are aggressive enough to do it. We'll see. I'd have to look into their farm system a little bit more, in all honesty. But I absolutely expect them to be aggressive at the deadline. I expect the Cubs to be aggressive with selling. We'll get to them here in just a second. But the Mets here, I wanted to get your thoughts really quick on the bullpen situation. So, how do you think that they should try to upgrade somebody from in the back end of that bullpen? Because I do still think it's a middle of the pack one in the major leagues. While it's better than the liability they've had the last few years, I don't think that's being talked about quite enough. And I do think it's something they should address before the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm definitely upgrading that bullpen. I don't believe in Juris Familia, and I don't think a Mets fan wants to see that guy step foot on the mound again, because it seems like every time he's in, I was going to start calling him Blows Melia, because that's all he does. He comes in there and blows baseball games. So he's definitely, it's glad he's not in the closer role anymore. I don't think they target a closer, I'll be honest. I think they target some setup guys that can get people out. I'm going back to the Cubs here, but Andrew Chafin from the left side, and no Loops there. 2 lefties out of the bullpen could be huge in the playoffs. You look also at the right-handed side, you could go out to another team that's been falling apart this year, pick up one of their best relievers. You've seen teams do that before. It doesn't have to be a closer to make an impact on this team. And I truly believe that they're still 100% in on Edwin Diaz being that guy, even in the playoffs, to where you don't need to bring in a big-time closer. You could just bring in a solid relief arm that's getting big outs in big situations under pressure.
Yeah, and if they do target somebody who's been a setup arm, they could also theoretically take over as a closer if Diaz gets injured, or if he becomes more ineffective or pulls a Chapman later in the season. So I do agree with that. Shorter topic on the Mets, but I think they're in good shape. We're going to really address them more once we see what they do at the trade deadline. But they have the good fortune of being a above 500 team in a bad division that hasn't been fully healthy or even close to it for most of the season, and they are still more than treading water. So that is encouraging for a Mets fan perspective, which makes me sad, but I got to give them some props where it's due. And I think this is the segment that you were waiting for. Is it Cubs time?
It is. And the reason the Mets was a little bit shorter was strictly because they're playing good baseball. You don't really need to address them as much as you do with the Yankees and the Cubs, who are flawed at what they do. The Mets, they've done a great job buying people with what they got. Whatever they have, they give up for and they get it. So they've been playing good baseball. We'll get into them later, but they've been playing well. So there's nothing really to recap other than they're doing everything well. They're only going to get better.
I agree. Now the Cubs, on the other hand, They did have a combined no-hitter a couple weeks ago. We didn't get to mention that. That was pretty cool. They followed that up by losing 11 straight games and falling under
Yes.
500 and going from a team that might be buying at the deadline, which would have pissed you off, to a team that absolutely is, I think, is going to be selling off some major pieces at the trade deadline before their contracts expire. So I have a lot of questions I'd love to ask. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts here. But let's we'll recap that the Cubs are a few games under 500, struggling in a pretty mediocre division overall. I believe they were tied with St. Louis last I checked for third in the division. And they are likely to be amongst the game's biggest sellers at the trade deadline. Now, I personally thought that this was inevitable since they were basically forced to trade Yu Darvish in a salary dump in the offseason. And it's finally starting to rear its ugly head after a pretty good start. Who do you think is getting traded, and what do you want in return?
I'm glad you asked me this question because I hopped on the old MLB The Show 2021, and I broke this team up the way that they should be broken up. I sent Chris Bryant out. Bryant is on his way out of town, but I do have a thought that I'll get into later. Chris Bryant, I think, holds the most value of a player on a one-year contract on the Cubs right now. Now, the players on the one-year contract include Baez, Rizzo, Bryant, Zach Davies, Ryan Tepera, Andrew Chafin. He actually could provide almost the equal value to Chris Bryant at this point, I believe. Now, Bryant's a bat that could play third base, left field, center field, right field, first base. He could play literally anywhere besides up the middle and catcher. So he provides a lot of value to your team. I'm sending him to a team like the New York Mets. I believe they're front runners, and the Cubs did have 2 scouts in attendance at Port St. Lucie, checking out a pitcher and a utility player who are ranked 4th and 8th on the New York Mets top prospect list. So they've already done some scouting on the Mets, whether that's for one of the relievers I mentioned. Maybe it's Zach Davies. Maybe it's a Chris Bryant. But I think Bryant's top candidates. I believe a team like the New York Mets will be interested. I wouldn't put it past the Los Angeles Dodgers either. I know that they're a big powerhouse, but they could always add on. First base is still somewhat of a question for them. You could put Muncy at second. Left field's open. Do you really want A.J. Pollock there? You could move him back to a bench role and have Bryant just explode. And that division's tough. You gotta factor in the Padres are on their ass. The Giants have come out of nowhere and have been a freaking powerhouse this year. So Chris Bryant's destinations, I think, could be Los Angeles, could be the Mets. I personally sent him to Los Angeles to the Dodgers. I got Matt Beatty and Ryan Pepiot, a pitching prospect, in return. I feel like Beatty gives the first base versatility if Rizzo walks. Could play left, could also play third base.
So first of all, it seems like you've given this topic some thought,
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm sure came across in my segments on my favorite teams, and I expected nothing less of you, my friend. But I absolutely so basically, anyone who might not be familiar with how a trade deadline in a sport usually works, if there is a struggling or a bad team with a good player who's on a contract that expires at the end of that season, they will usually trade that player to a good team who's trying to win a championship, so that player does not leave in free agency and they get nothing in return. So that's kind of what we're talking about with buyers or sellers. So the Cubs are a team that are going to sell off valuable pieces like Craig Kimbrell, or Chris Bryant. And the Mets are a better team who are going to try to buy pieces like that to put them over the top for a championship run. So if anyone was confused on that, I agree that Kimbrell has the most value of any of the Cubs tradable expiring contracts. He is going to get a solid haul from somebody at the deadline. I don't see him going to the Mets personally, especially if they are on board with Edwin Diaz, but there are a lot of people to keep in mind there. Now, obviously, they're going to avoid trading him to Milwaukee, but I could see the Brewers being interested in making some moves. The Giants, I think, are going to make moves as well because, I don't think they're as talented as the Dodgers or the Padres on paper, but they have been overachieving. Some regression is probably due. I still think they're a very good team, but I think they're going to be aggressive to try to stay in front and avoid that wild card game. The American League, I think Tampa Bay is a real wild card for one of these expiring contracts, as much as I hate to admit it. They are a famously frugal team, but if they get somebody who for the rest of a season, they can trade from their loaded farm system, help a team like the Cubs rebuild. The American League Central, I don't really see anything happening there because they don't want a repeat of what happened with the last time they traded with the White Sox, and the rest of the division is not really in position to make a trade. So that leaves me the American League West.
Yep. Two
I'd be
spots.
really curious to see if Oakland or the Astros make a move. I do think they are not being talked about enough. And Oakland, also famously stingy, we saw them go for John Lester in 2014, I believe, even though they needed help more in the lineup. Could they go for a Craig Kimbrell type at the deadline, or do they want Chris Bryant's expiring contract? I don't really see Bryant just because they have Matt Chapman there, but they could play him in the outfield. So a lot of possibilities. I think at the very least, Kimbrell and Bryant are being moved. Now, what makes it more, what I'm more interested to see, Javier Baez and Anthony Rizzo are on expiring contracts as well. Do you think one or either of them, or one or both of them, are going to be traded? And more in your mind, should either one of them be traded?
Yeah, I want to touch on the Kimbrel thing first before I get to them. But you look at Craig Kimbrel. I personally think Athletics, Astros, Rays in that order. And as a Cubs fan, I'm dying that the Rays are calling. I want the slapdick prospect what's his face, Blake Snell made known, with Xavier Edwards, who has one career home run in the minor leagues through 3 seasons but gets on base. I want him, and I want a bunch of other players in their system. Josh Lowe, Carlos Colmenares, a couple players that I want. But those are the names that I want from them. But you're looking at the two guys that you mentioned with Javier Baez and Anthony Rizzo. And this gets me a little bit fired up. Now, Javier Baez, I don't think there's a chance he goes. Javi Baez is going to stay with the Cubs until the offseason, and they're going to try to work out a deal. But I feel like they're not trading Rizzo and Bryant. They're going to pick one or the other. And Bryant, with the famous Scott Boras having a better year than Rizzo, I think he's gone. But Anthony Rizzo makes me nervous. Here's why. You look at what happened. I don't know if you caught the news with Wilson Contreras, what he said after the defeating 6-0 loss against the St. Louis Cardinals. They lost, and he said, nobody is playing with a fire. He said, me and Baez. Those were the two ones he pointed out on the team. He called out the whole clubhouse saying we're the only ones playing with fire and at least showing effort on a consistent basis. David Ross didn't back up his catcher. David Ross sat back and was basically said, no, Wilson, I believe he spoke out of context. Chris Bryant, Craig Kimbrell backed up Wilson, went to war with him. Where's Anthony Rizzo during this? Anthony Rizzo's curling up in a ball. Him and Ross have been buddy-buddy for years. You look back to the teams that Rizzo's been there, and I really want to go back. You go back to the 2012 when he finally arrived in Chicago, the team that he had there, not a lot of leadership. By the time he grew into a veteran, he had someone like a David Ross right there with him in 2015 and 16 to help him get to that journey, to help push him in the locker room of being a leader. He had the opportunity to be a leader in 17. They collapsed. Jason Hayward has really been the voice of that club that has been the only one holding them together. And then Ross comes back. He's still managing. Anthony Rizzo's not a leader. Anthony Rizzo's not someone that you think he is. He's a great guy, off the field, great guy. He's a great player. But I think he's the issue in the clubhouse right now, as crazy as it sounds. Wilson Contreras is going to war. He's ready to play. He took 98 miles an hour off the head. The helmet shot 10 yards back, and he sprinted down to first base and stayed in the ball game. That's effort. That's what you want to see. Anthony Rizzo, I would not be shocked if they end up trading him, because he just – I think from an organizational standpoint, he might be an issue with the team, as crazy as that sounds.
It is an interesting thought. I do think Rizzo has not been quite as vocal as you and I'm sure other Cubs fans have desired. I don't know if I'd go quite as far to say he's been a problem yet necessarily. I think he's more of a laid back guy, but we know Wilson Contreras is one of the most passionate, almost volatile players in Major League Baseball. He has been like that since he came up and was arguing with umpires and was that fly out of here. No, that was live, but it's been bugging me for the last 20 minutes. But Contreras has been a player that would argue calls at the plate and at bat, and then try to get those same calls when he was catching the next inning. He has had that emotion tattooed to him since he's come up, and I expect that to continue. And that was actually one of the other questions I wanted to ask. I had one more after that before we wrap up with the White Sox. But these two things kind of tie together. I was going to mention Contreras' comments where he's saying the effort's not there from a team-wide standpoint, and that David Ross seemed to disagree. Now, obviously the Cubs ownership and the Jed Hoyer situation, and they have been pretty famously cheap and frugal here and clearly trying to save money. even especially when fans weren't allowed back at the ballpark yet. And now that they've basically backed themselves into a corner where they have to sell, and the Cubs are probably looking at a couple of bad years in the immediate future. Do you think, a simple question now, do you think David Ross is the right man for the job to oversee that rebuild?
I don't. As much as it pains me to say, I don't think he's the guy for the rebuild, but he's going to get the opportunity. I don't think he's someone that gets fired after the end of this year, end of next year. Like he's a long-term manager. He's someone that knows the game, he's been rumored to be a manager throughout his whole playing career, and has an opportunity. He's a fiery guy. He gets the clubhouse going. He hasn't done it this year, but in 2020 he got everyone to buy in. And I think if you get him a roster without all the drama of the contracts, of not living up to 16, to all these things that have happened, I think that he's still the man for the job that you cannot let walk out of that building. So I think he's still the right guy for the job in the future. But right now, I feel like it's a tough situation because he played for this team and they're getting broken up. And he hasn't been in a situation like that where he's got to have those hard conversations with brothers that he played with and teammates. So I think he's the wrong guy for the job now. If you hired him in 2023, I'd be screaming from the mountaintops. It just seems like it's a tough spot to where if you're not bringing back any of these guys, then why did you hire David Ross in the first place to manage the guys that he played with?
Yeah, there have been so many variables. I definitely would argue, at the very least, that when he was hired, I don't think a global pandemic was expected to completely change the Cubs'
Right.
financial approach to building the team. And so that one's obviously not on him exactly. But it's definitely been one of the major factors that's led to the notoriously cheap owners of the Cubs, the Ricketts, to be even cheaper than usual in the last year or two. And I definitely think that's led to a worse product on the field. Now, in fairness, the Cubs haven't really been sellers for about 7 or 8 years now. They won a World Series when they were buying. They've at least been a playoff team the last few years since, for the most part. So it's hard to say that it's been a failure period, especially considering what happened in the century before that. But it does look like they're going to at least struggle for a couple of years. If they are, the more pieces they trade off now, theoretically, the more prospects they could get back to try to rebuild and load up for the mid 2020s, I would say, is a reasonable target to try to start building back up. The last question, we've been talking about them for a while. I want to wrap up with the White Sox here. Now, you mentioned it earlier, actually, during the Yankees segment, that I think one of the Cubs' issues in the last few years has been their lack of player development. Why do you think that's been the case? What do you think they can do to improve it?
It's mainly been No, I can't even say that anymore. I was going to say it's mainly been the pitching. I can't say it. Ian Happ's been horse shit. Ian Happ needs to stop spending time making coffee and doing his podcast and start learning how to hit a freaking baseball. I mean, this guy goes up there. He's hit like 3 home runs right-handed the last 3 years. The guy's a freaking joke every single time he steps out on the ball field. So saying he's a first-round pick, I'd rather have Corey Patterson right now, the big swing and miss that they made earlier in the early 20th century. But I mean, I can't with this team, man. I just can't do it. I mean, it's sick. I hope Nico Horner doesn't fall into this trap where the players just – they've gone through hitting coach after hitting coach after hitting coach, whether it's Chili Davis, whether it's John Maley. Now they got who's the guy they got right now? It's Anthony Iapoce. I mean, they go through hitting coaches year after year after year, and they're trying to stick with one, and it still doesn't work. I mean, it's a disaster with how they haven't really gotten anything together. And I don't know if that's a credit to Joe Maddon's staff or anything like that, because we've seen different managerial staffs, different coaches move in, and these players are still not living up to what they did. It seemed like everyone, actually 2016 was the outlier, and everything else was who the Cubs were. And it just took them time to realize that. But if I'm signing someone, if I had to pick one player on this ball club, I'm signing Wilson Contreras today to a 10-year contract, and I'm fine with that. I'd play him at third. I'd play him at left when Amaya comes up. It doesn't matter. So hopefully the future of the Cubs looks good. Brendan Davis did win MVP of the Futures game, so maybe that's something to look forward to. But anyway, that's where I stand with the Cubs right now. I do think some starting pitchers will be moved at the deadline. You could try to get young stars like Keegan Thompson in the rotation along with Al Zalai to get them innings, but it's tough.
Yeah, we'll see if they do actually end up selling off here in the next couple of weeks, which is anticipated. The Cubs have basically said that's what's going to happen, but actions will speak louder than words on that one. So we'll see. They do have some young talent, and the payroll is going to be pretty open after the season, depending on who's re-signed, because Hayward and Kyle Hendricks, and I think our, Contreras has one more arbitration year, are the only big contracts that are left at the moment. So that gives them some flexibility for those penny pinchers in the front office. So I want to move on there to the Southsiders in Chicago, the Chicago White Sox. Now, we started it with the New York baseball teams, one that's frustrating us, one that's doing pretty well. We're going to do the same thing with Chicago here, one that's frustrating us, and to a first place White Sox team that's also in good shape to be buyers at the deadline to try to contend right now. So it's kind of a interesting comparison with the two teams in both cities here. The White Sox are starting to get healthier as well. It looks like Eloy Jimenez is starting to get close to returning. He will most likely be a full-time DH when he returns, so that might limit lineup flexibility just a bit. But there's a lot of talent in all phases of this White Sox roster. How do you see them approaching the trade deadline in the second half of the season going into the playoffs?
What's that commercial? Buy, 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 buy. That's what they're doing. They're throwing everything in and they are buying. I mean, they need a second baseman. I think that's clear. I wouldn't rule out Trevor Story. They heard about that during All-Star Weekend. A team like the White Sox, he said he wants to win. Maybe he plays second base there. Now, we all know Story's a better shortstop than Tim Anderson, but you're not moving Tim Anderson off a shortstop. I mean, he's that dude, so you can't really take him off there. So I do think they need to be in the market for a second baseman, potentially another bench bat, but it seems like they keep calling players up and they keep producing. It doesn't matter if it's Jake Berger, if it's Gavin Sheets. I mean, they just pull them out of nowhere and then they produce. Or Lurie Garcia, Billy Hamilton, Brian Goodwin. I mean, good Lord, anybody could step in and produce for this team. It's nuts how much production they have gotten. So I do think second base is an upgrade. Maybe it's Adam Frazier, another name to throw out there. Eduardo Escobar, we mentioned before. But those are the three that I think they should target if they're trying to upgrade.
Adam Frazier was the one that I wanted to mention on the Pirates, who are almost guaranteed to trade him in a couple of weeks. And the White Sox should definitely be one of those callers. Outside of that, yeah, the depth of the team has been ridiculous, especially offensively. They have been missing Eloy Jimenez all season so far, Luis Robert as well. Nick Madrigal is out for the rest of the season, part of the reason they need that second baseman, I would say. But the only guys who have started to decline a little bit offensively, really, Adam Eaton, who was just designated for assignment and signed with the Angels, I believe, earlier today. And Yermain Mercedes, who's had a very interesting season where he went from starting the season 8 for 8 and hitting 360 to slumping big time right after his manager called him out for hitting a home run. Yep, remember that episode. He's had an interesting year. So he's down in AAA now. The White Sox are starting to get healthier in the lineup. One question that I wanted to ask moving on to their pitching rotation. Now, as solid as it's been for the most part, we've talked about what an amazing season Carlos Rodon has had in particular and some of the consistency they've gotten. One guy who has been, I'd say, average and inconsistent is Lucas Giolito. Do you think he can improve in the second half of the season? And if not, what do you think the White Sox need to make a move for a pitcher?
They don't need to move. They don't need to make a move for a starter. They do need to make a move for a bullpen arm. But Lucas Giolito, I said it at the time that this happened. He needs James McCann. He needs James McCann. I mean, you look at the numbers with him and McCann. They're solid. I mean, he's an all-star pitcher. He was in the running for the Cy Young Award. I mean, this dude was legit when James McCann was catching him. So ever since he lost him, he really hasn't been the same this season. 4.15 ERA, not bad. I mean, it's not bad, but he's not the horse. Lance Lynn's been the horse. You also had Carlos Rodon there. I mean, that trade right now, the Lance Lynn for Dane Dunning, that was a great move. So they've done a great job there. Lucas Giolito, it's tough. But I do rule out one thing. Now, we saw the injury to Yasmani Grandal. Maybe they do upgrade the catcher position. But you look at the pitching staff. I think that has a toll on your pitching staff. Zach Collins catching them. I mean, catchers and pitchers have that sync to where it helps them going forward, knowing that you have someone trustworthy catching you, whether that's Kyle Higashioka with Garrett Cole we saw a couple times. I mean, that's what you really need to see. And I think if you have CB Zavala catching Lance Lynn, it might cause some issues. So trying to sure out the catcher spot should help the rotation enough to where I don't think they need to make a move for another starting pitcher.
I think they have enough depth in the starting rotation, but they don't have that same luxury the Mets might, where they don't have somebody on the shelf who could come back and be an impact guy that's already on the roster. So while I think they're more likely to target a bullpen arm as well, we always see contenders go out and get somebody that can help shorten the game in the playoffs. I don't think it's out of the question they go for a back end of the rotation piece for them that's a decent pitcher for a bad team right now. You mentioned that now the Baltimore Orioles do not have a pitcher outside of Means who was worth acquiring, and Means should not be available. But I understand the point you were making there, and I think the White Sox are in a similar position. Gavin Sheets, Jake Berger, everyone else who's come up, Andrew Vaughn, they've all been productive. They've been able to fill in. They're even getting some catches in the mud from Billy Hamilton out there. So there's a lot of depth in the lineup. Now, the pitching staff, I think, is still in pretty good shape overall. But out after Liam Hendricks and Aaron Bummer, now we're seeing Kopech and we're seeing Garrett Crochet. So there is still some talent in the bullpen already. But I always think you can add more, especially an experienced arm. Outside of Bummer and Hendricks, it's still a relatively high-risk, high-reward group. So they're not – I don't think the Cubs are going to make the mistake of sending Kimbrel there unless maybe they get Eloy Jimenez back, but he should be there you go. But he should be a DH now anyway, and the Cubs don't have that. So
next year.
What'd you say?
Next year.
Yeah, I am curious to see what happens there, but that's a conversation for the offseason. But the White Sox, I expect to be very aggressive. Similar now, their division is not quite as bad as the Mets, but that's kind of the parallel we're at here today. The Yankees and Cubs have some similarities in terms of they've been struggling. The Mets and White Sox are more top of their division, going to be aggressive. One of the reasons the White Sox have been so successful, I think, the Minnesota Twins have had a terrible season, kind of out of nowhere, and we knew that Kansas City and Detroit weren't going to challenge them for any division wins this year. So Cleveland, second place by default, I would say at this point. White Sox have no excuse not to win their division and avoid that wild card round. So they are going to be aggressive and try to put themselves over the top to bring a title back for the first time since 2005.
Sounds crazy to hear that. Like the Chicago White Sox could win the World Series this year, but they've been insane given their injuries, and I know their division you mentioned has been tough. I did think of one name when you mentioned the Twins. Michael Pineda would be all right with the New York Mets. He'd be a nice back of the rotation guy that you could add late. It wouldn't cost you too much. I think Barrios would definitely cost more. But anyway, sticking with the White Sox, they're in a great spot. A credit to Tony La Russa, too. He's getting a lot out of his players. And I know he's someone that we did harp on a little bit, especially with stuff that happened to him before the season started. But I think he's done a great job so far getting the most out of his players, and it seems like they're buying in.
He's done some good things. I'm not ready to fully credit him yet. I mean, it's easy to give him credit while the White Sox are succeeding, but they have way too much talent and struggle elsewhere in the division not to. I still have some questions about his impact on the culture in terms of how he handled that whole Yermain Mercedes situation in the past and how he didn't know one of the specifics with that bullshit runner on second rule in a game earlier this season. So there have been some missteps. I know he's been away from the dugout for a while and a lot's changed, but I still thought he was a bit of a strange hire. And I'm really curious to see how aggressive the White Sox are at the deadline in terms of how much do they want to buy in for this season and shorten their window down the line. But they are in position to do that, where they should have at least 3 or 4 chances to try to win a World Series if they don't end up doing it this year. And they very well could. But I'm still not all the way sold on La Russa yet. I'm just not there.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. I think it might be a wait and see thing for him, but it's been tough. I think the early season stuff was definitely something to pinpoint on what has happened. But as of late, it seems like he's really done a lot with this ball club. But I mean, it's something there with Tony La Russa. I think he can only improve in the second half of the season when he gets his players back. It's just going to be those late game decisions. Will he be exposed in the playoffs like Rick Renteria will, or will his old school mentality of letting the pitcher ride out could potentially be the opposite approach that Blake Snell had in the World Series with Kevin Cash?
Yeah, just don't allow La Russa around too many liquor stores or bars, and he should be making some solid choices.
Yeah, that would be nice. It would be nice to see some solid choices. Before we wrap it up, we didn't get to the Mets, Cubs, White Sox on their end of season and their managerial grade. So we'll start going back to the Mets. Where do you have them finishing, and what is the managerial grade for Luis Rojas?
I have the Mets finishing first place. I'm going to go 92-70, maybe up that 3 wins somewhere in there, low to mid 90s. And I'm going to give Luis Rojas a B plus. I think he's done a very, very solid job getting the most out of an injury plagued roster.
I'm going B for Luis Rojas. I have the Mets winning the division and losing in the World Series. Going to the Chicago Cubs, what is your grade and what is your finish?
David Ross, I'm going to go with a C minus. I think it's getting a little bit worse over time here, which isn't a great sign. Finishing, assuming that they sell, I am going to go. Let's go 75-87, and I think they're going to finish fourth place in the division.
Wow, 75-87. I think they still have enough. Well, I guess I'm not that far off. I'm going 77-85. That's where I got them finishing. But 2 wins better.
You're going to give me shit over 2 games?
Take that. Yeah, I do realize like they got an easy schedule coming up in this month. But anyway, you look at this team. I'm going with the managerial grade for David Ross. I'm with you with the C minus. He's done a great job. If there's one thing to pinpoint, he's done a great job of getting the most out of his relievers and the situation he's put them in. Long relief, whether it's setup roles, he's done a great job in that department. And finally, with the Chicago White Sox, their finish and the managerial grade.
White Sox, I'm going to go some nice easy math here. First place, 162, 100 wins, 62 losses.
Nice.
I think they're going to finish this season strong. Managerial grade, I think. Yeah, I can't criticize too much. I'm going to knock a little bit off for that whole Mercedes situation because I thought that was really, really stupid. I'm going to go with a B minus for Tony La Russa.
103-59. I got them at a managerial grade with TLR at a B plus. I thought he's done a great job of getting the most out of his players. I mentioned that already. And I do have the Chicago White Sox winning the World Series.
You do like to make bold claims, don't you?
Yeah, and you'd be surprised my NLCS.
Well, we'll save that for a little playoff preview down the line. How's that?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
But
I'd
anyway,
rather have them than the Astros.
Right. They just continue to win, but they are a thorn. Anyway, that's going to do it for today. I appreciate everybody that tuned in. Be sure to check us out on YouTube, also Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave a like, leave a subscribe, leave a review. Give us all the stars that you think we earned. And I appreciate everybody tuning in. For Slig, this is Dylan Kearns with the Big City Sports Podcast. We will see you next time.